أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الأطيبين الأطهرين الهداة المهديين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم إلى قيام يوم الدين. Dear brothers and sisters, respected ulama, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, we will have an opportunity during this conference to gain much knowledge and insight into the character, the teachings, and the inspiration that we can derive from the personality of our beloved Prophet Muhammad al-Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. But in one way, the benefit that we can derive from a conference like this, or from any opportunity to study or to connect to the Prophet, will depend on the types of questions that we have coming in to that study or that interaction. If a person has good questions, then they will find good answers. If we have real needs and vacuums within our life that we wish to plug, that we wish to fill through the teachings of the Prophet, then the inspiration that we will derive and the insight that we will gain from a review of the seerah will be very different than if we have not first thought about what vacuums exist within our life, what needs there are that we need to get answers for. And so I believe one of the primary goals of this session is for us not to begin to look for answers, but to begin to better define the questions and the problems that we are going to seek answers for. And those answers will come partially through the next few days and the programming that we have here, but that is also meant to be something that continues as an intellectual exercise, as a participatory and a practical effort on our part as individuals and families and communities. And so in the limited time that we have, I want to focus on perhaps just one of those questions that many of us are confronted with, sometimes explicitly and sometimes without even knowing it, as we live in a modern and a secular society. But before I begin with that issue that I think is probably more important than any other in terms of our ability to benefit from the totality of our Islamic teachings, I want to give an example of how a change in society, in culture, and in circumstances can make a very big difference in our ability to appreciate, understand, and benefit from some of the teachings that we have within Islam. In the sense that the verses of Quran, the sayings of the Prophet and his progeny, the rules that we learn within fiqh and within Islamic law, and then the ethical principles that tie together those rules and those values and those teachings. All of them are based upon certain principles, which in many cases are very different to the principles that we are familiar with culturally and that have meaning within our society. To give you one example, all of you are familiar with the concept of Silatul Rahim. Silatul Rahim is to connect with our relatives, to maintain the ties of family and kinship. And that is a very important obligation within Islam. It is not permissible for a person to cut ties of kinship, even if our family members don't agree with us in terms of their character, in terms of their practice of religion, or even in terms of religious affiliation. A person can say that my relative is not a good Muslim, and therefore I will cut them off. We can't even say that they are not Muslim, and we will cut them off. Now, my purpose here is not to give us a lecture on the importance of Silatul Rahim, but I want to just evoke the teachings that we have heard and that we are familiar with. It is something that is emphasized within Islam. It is an obligation. The opposite of Silatul Rahim, Qati'atul Rahim, is a grave sin. And it is one of those obligations that is so important that Islam tells us that Allah will not reserve the reward for the hereafter. If a person connects with one's relatives before the hereafter, it will give you increased rizq, increased sustenance, a longer life in this world. There are some things that are so important that they will be rewarded in the hereafter, of course, but also in this world. And there are some sins that are so grave that Allah will punish them, yes, in the hereafter, but even in this world before the hereafter. And Silatul Rahim is one of those obligations. Qati'atul Rahim, cutting off family ties, is one of those grave sins. So this is a value system that we have within Islam. Now, in a traditional and a pre-modern society, that value system plugged in to various parts of a person's life. It was an organic part of how a person was going to be able to grow and develop materially and not just spiritually. The material environment was harmonious with that Islamic teaching. And what Islam did is it added a spiritual dimension, a religious dimension to something that was part of people's life. Generally, if there was a person who wanted to start a business, then the best resource they would get to be able to learn that business, to acquire the capital and to fund it, would be from one's relatives. If there was ever social upheaval, a drought, political instability, a person's source of strength and support and protection would be one's extended family. If a person was faced with a personal setback, a health problem, a death or a divorce within the family, God forbid, then it would be the family that would be the source of support and strength. That was the way that human society operated. The danger was that people would look at that relationship in purely tribal terms, in purely material terms. Everybody understood in pre-modern society the importance of family. Some people understood the importance of family as being something that was a matter of tribal identity, and Islam said that it should be something that has a spiritual and a religious component that transcends your material and your physical circumstances. I value my family not because the life of my brother is more important than the life of somebody else's brother, or the life of my sister is more important than the life of somebody else's. That is how people would often honor their family relations in earlier times, by not giving justice and value to other people's relationships and their families. Islam says that we are to honor that as a means of recognizing one another and as a means of recognizing the circumstances which God has created us in His wisdom. You've heard the story or the saying that you cannot choose your family, you can choose your friends. Generally, people say that when they want to say that I value my friends and I benefit from that relationship, but my family, if they're compatible and if they're good for me and to me, I will value them. If they're not, I won't. But as a Muslim, how would we modify that statement? I get to choose my friends. Who chose my family? God. Is my choice for myself better, or is God's choice for me better? Of course God's choice for me is better. So yes, I don't get to choose my family. God chose my parents. God chose my arham, my relatives. And if God is all-knowing and wise and all-powerful, then His choice deserves to be given more importance and more humility than my own choice. So now, we have this teaching within Islam. We see how it connects to a pre-modern society. What is the problem? Today, what of those roles does one's extended family need to fulfill? It used to be a source of education and apprenticeship for a child coming of age, male or female. Nowadays, we have other institutions that fulfill that role better. And if your uncle is a lawyer, you're still going to need to go to law school and pass the bar exam. I don't know if economically it's a good idea, the lawyers can tell us. But you're not going to just get an apprenticeship and then open up shop. It used to be the first bank that many people would use. Nowadays, that might not be possible. It used to be a source of health insurance and a source of life insurance. And nowadays, you have many other avenues that can probably do that more predictably, more reliably. Our life circumstances in so many areas are such that the material roles that family used to play are no longer operative within our lives. And so it's not the same thing for us to say that Islam says your family relations are important. And if we want to be able to honor that Islamic teaching, we can't just do it by quoting the ahadith and quoting the verses of Quran and saying you have to give importance to this Islamic principle. And the reason for that is that the circumstances of our lives have changed so much. In many cases, our parents and our children and our other relatives, our spouses, they don't fulfill the same societal and material and economic roles that they would fulfill in earlier times. We still have to honor that Islamic principle, but in order to do so, we have to recreate and reimagine some of our relationships and our institutions within the Muslim community so that we give meaning to family in a material sense, in a social sense. And then we apply those teachings to give a spiritual and a transcendent reality to those relationships. So the example that I wanted to give was for us to appreciate how changed circumstances require us not just to say that we have to emphasize it more. It's not by preaching, but it is by some creativity, where we need to create a culture, we need to create a certain type of environment that allows those Islamic teachings to have meaning and not just to be seen as an obligation that God has put on our shoulders. That requires not necessarily a reformation of Islam, but it requires intellectual curiosity and humility and creativity on our part. Now, if you're still with me, and I haven't put you to sleep, then please recite salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Alhamdulillah, that's the barakah of Muhammad, that your salawat was a good salawat and I wouldn't need to ask you to repeat it louder. But because it is salawat on the Prophet, please repeat it one more time. So what is perhaps the most important issue that challenges our spirituality and our religiosity as Muslims living today, and especially living in our Western society? In my mind, probably the biggest challenge that each and every one of us faces is that religion or spiritual affiliation, I don't like the word religion, but let's say religious and spiritual affiliation, is not seen as a meaningful primary identity. In our society, in our culture, among our peers and our friends, for our main identity, for our primary identity, and if I can be even more extreme, for our sole identity to be based on our religion and our ideology and our spiritual affiliation, that doesn't really make sense. I can give several examples, and many of you may have experienced and seen some of these examples. We have a hadith of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, that the blood and the property of a believer, of a Muslim, are sacrosanct and are prohibited for another believer to dishonor or to shed. So I cannot be careless about the life and the blood of a fellow Muslim or about his or her property. And sometimes in the Muslim world, when we have cases of takfir, cases of extremism, cases of violence or aggression among the Muslim ummah, then the response that is given is, why are you against the Sufi, for example, Muslims? They are Muslim too. And the way that plays out in the media is, so are you saying that because the Sunni and the Shia and the Sufis and these other schools of thought are Muslim, they deserve to have rights? What about the non-Muslims in those societies? What do you mean we are Muslim too, therefore don't kill us? Or they are Muslim too, therefore don't kill them? That should be something that is based on human terms, not based on religious terms. That's not false, but there is a nuance and a beauty in the Islamic teaching which made sense to people at one time, and today it strikes many Muslims and many non-Muslims as being almost backwards. By the way, we're used to that kind of discrimination if it's a matter of national identity. So many of us signed up for insurance recently on the healthcare system. There are people who are living in this society, perhaps through no fault of their own, who don't qualify for that subsidized healthcare. Maybe because of their immigration status, because of their citizenship status. And for us to have that kind of discrimination is not something that culturally is seen as backwards. They are human beings as well, just as a citizen is a human being. The citizen may not have earned anything, and that non-citizen may be a much more worthy human being and much more greatly in need. But to have discrimination in certain rights, in certain kinds of benefits on the basis of coincidence and circumstances of birth, that's fine within our society. But to say that because someone is a Muslim, they have a special right in their property or in their life, that is something that strikes people the wrong way. So the primary identity, if it is Islam, it's something that is a little bit questionable. Another example that we have is a rights issue whether it be human rights, whether it be social, political, or other forms of rights, should we see them in religious terms, or should we see them in purely human terms? There are burning questions within the Muslim Ummah, from one corner to the other. Palestine is a long-standing issue. Is Palestine an Arab issue? Is it an Islamic issue? Or is it a human issue? Now, those three characterizations are not mutually contradictory. But you and I, primarily, how do we see the issue of Palestine? In linguistic or ethnic terms as an Arab issue? In religious terms as a Muslim or an Islamic issue? Or in human terms as a concern for every human being? If we were to say that we see it primarily in religious terms, not to say that our concerns are limited to Muslims or our concerns are limited to Shi'i Muslims or Sunni Muslims, but that what concerns we have, they are oriented on the basis of our religious loyalty and affiliation, that is something that to modern society in our culture, it does not make a whole lot of sense. Religious identity and affiliation can be one of your identities, but it would always be one of many, and generally it would be secondary. And we can see the harm that this has brought when people say that we want to strip away national and linguistic and cultural affiliations, and we want to have just an Islamic identity. Right? That is what we see when you have the arrogance and the extremism of these groups that come, for example, to Syria or to other countries in the Muslim world. And they don't speak the language, and they don't know the nature of that society, and they say that, well, because I am a Muslim, I have an equal right to this land, and I have an equal right to assert my opinion as somebody who is native to this land. So do you see the extreme on both sides? On the one hand, modern society has taken away the value of that religious identity as your primary and as your formative identity. And the response to that, the reaction to that, has sometimes come in the form of extremism. Now, the Quran says that our identity is to be formed on the basis of our ideology, not on the basis of a coincidence or a circumstance of my birth. Right? We are told that when people come to us and say, follow this religion or that religion, or join this group as a label or that group as a label, بَلْ مِلَّةَ إِبْرَاهِيمَ حَنِيفًا. Right? I will follow the millah of Ibrahim, the upright, because he was not a mushrik. So it is that affiliation and not the label of Christian or Jew or the label of ethnicity that is going to form my identity. But at the same time, Islam tells us that that religious affiliation and identity is not meant to be something that makes us ignore culture and ignore all of the other components of a human society. Which is why that we are told that Allah never sent any prophet except that that prophet would be intimately familiar with the nature of that society. The Quran describes the prophets as the brothers of their people because they were intimate members of the communities that they were going to be sent to guide. Not somebody who is foreign and unfamiliar. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِن رَسُولٍ إِلَّا بِلِسَانِ قَوْمِهِ لِيُبَيِّنَ لَهُمْ. Allah says in Surah Ibrahim that every prophet was sent in the idiom and not just the language of his people, so that he would be able to explain to them in a way that they would understand. So in Islam, the identity is going to be rooted in our religious affiliation. But that's not going to mean that we are going to ignore language, culture, idiom, and the local conditions of our society. That is a balance which is difficult to maintain. That is a balance that it is your challenge and my challenge as members of the Muslim community to create. On the one hand, we have a struggle to assert that it is reasonable and enlightened for us to say that our identity comes not on the basis of what passport my parents held, not on the basis of what language I speak when I am with close friends or what language I happen to dream in, not on the basis of the color of my skin or any of those other labels that have meaning within our society, but primarily on the basis of our religious affiliation. That is not just as enlightened as another basis for identity, but it is far more enlightened. That is one challenge and one struggle that we have. And how can we support and assert that identity in its formation and in its fruition and in its development? But then the other challenge is that if we have that primary identity rooted in religious affiliation and loyalty, how do we do so in a way that recognizes the reality and the importance of culture, the importance of people's practice and their connection to their society? Islam is not to strip away that which gives us the cultural expression that we are rooted in, but it is meant to raise that practice and to give it a religious and a spiritual identity. So very briefly, what are some of the areas that we need to explore in order to be able to further that identity, to assert that we as Muslims are not embarrassed about the fact that we are Muslims first and foremost, and we follow the millah of Ibrahim, وَمَا كَانَ مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. We are not embarrassed about the fact that every human issue that we give importance to and that we believe in and that we support because of our religious values and identity. And that humanitarianism is given meaning and depth through our religion and is not in competition with it. One issue is the issue of that identity itself. Another issue is the issue of how we can develop a moderation that is not a moderation from religion, but that is a moderation through religion. Generally speaking, if you go to your non-Muslim neighbor and you say, I have a friend, he is or she is a very committed Muslim. Islam is the only part of their identity. That's everything to them. Then generally that person is going to say, can I get that name? Can I get the address? I have a few phone calls to make. You might have Muslims who are scared about somebody who is super committed to Islam. And so we feel that we need to have moderation from Islam. Find something else. You can be a Muslim, but if you're too Muslim, something's wrong. But in reality, the more Muslim you are, the more insightful and the more moderate you should be. One of the most beautiful sayings of Amir al-Mu'mineen, which is reported in Nahj al-Balagha, Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. is the way in which the Imam defines the priorities and the scheduling of a believer. This is not somebody who is going to be a moderate because they have religion and then they have sports. They have religion and they have a hobby. They have religion and they have a career. They are going to be moderate because their religion puts everything in its proper place. The Imam says, لِلْمُؤْمِنِ ثَلَاثُ سَاعَاتٍ. This is one of those ahadith of Imam Ali that every one of us should remind ourselves of periodically. At the very least before every long weekend. لِلْمُؤْمِنِ ثَلَاثُ سَاعَاتٍ. Every believer should have 3 hours. سَاعَةٌ يُنَاجِي فِيهَا رَبَّهُ. An hour, a time, when a person does munajat and has a relationship with his or her creator. سَاعَةٌ يَرُمُّ مَعَاشَهُ. And an hour in which he or she looks after his life and livelihood. وَسَاعَةٌ يُخَلِّي فِيهَا بَيْنَ نَفْسِهِ وَبَيْنَ لَذَّتِهَا فِيمَا يَحِلُّ وَيَجْبُلُ. And an hour in which a person lets their nafs and their soul take pleasure and find its ladha. فِيمَا يَحِلُّ وَيَجْمُلُ. Within those things that are halal and that are beautiful, that have permissibility and that have aesthetic value. That is a person's religiosity that makes them take up a hobby and enjoy things that are halal and that are jameel, that are beautiful. That's not something that you need to moderate yourself from outside of religion, but if you are a stronger Muslim, that will be a part of your life. If you are a stronger Muslim, then you will care for your livelihood, and that will be part of your life. But the order the Imam gave is also instructive. First, يُنَاجِي فِيهَا رَبَّهُ, then يَرُمُّ مَعَاشَهُ, then يُخَلِّ بَيْنَ نَفْسِهِ وَلَذَّتِهَا فِيمَا يَحِلُّ وَيَجْمُلُ. So this is the second part of what we need to do to develop a moderation within our own practice of Islam that incorporates all of the facets of our life. I hope that we have had an opportunity to open up some of the challenges that we as Muslims face and some of those questions that we want to ask and that we want to try to find meaningful answers for in order for our spirituality to have relevance for our lives and a meaningful message for our communities. I thank you for your attention. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.